Welcome to Listen Up, the Buescher Bible Podcast. I'm Samuel. Today we're in Proverbs chapter 18. Verse 1 says, "A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment." I think this is an incredibly important verse for many, many reasons and for many, many people. And as an introvert, it was a verse that I struggled with for a while because I was like, does that mean I can never have alone time? That is not what that verse is saying. What it is saying is that a person who isolates himself is harming himself. Here's the difference. When you need a break from people, which all of us do sometimes, it is healthy to do that. Now, not all of us take our breaks in a healthy way. For some of us, we just binge entertainment and then we end up being more tired than we were before. And others of us go on a hike or a walk and feel way more refreshed. So there is a proper way to rest, and there is a way to rest that actually leads to being more tired and more peopled out. So what I find really helpful for me, and I think that it works for most people, is that when I need rest as an introvert, really what I need time without input. So if I'm on a hike or I'm on a walk or I'm drawing a picture or I am doing something in that kind of a realm, then I'm not receiving a lot of external input. It's when I'm in a big crowd for an extended period of time and I have to answer a lot of questions and I have to think through a lot of stuff that I become overwhelmed, and then I desire to have my introvert time. But when I am somewhere where I'm not hearing other people talking, I'm not listening to an audiobook, I'm not listening to a podcast, I don't have constant input, I'm not watching a show, then my mind is actually able to unwind and de-stress itself. Journaling is another thing that is really refreshing for me, because sometimes I have something that I'm fixated on and I can't get away from it. And when I put it down on paper, I'm able to complete that thought and lay it to rest, or develop an action plan, some way to take care of that. That is not what this verse is talking about. What this verse is talking about is the person who is seeking their own desire. So they have something that they want to do. And as people tell them that it's a bad idea, they cut themselves off from those people. So, they are essentially isolating themselves into their own desire, or they're isolating themselves from anybody that has an outside opinion that doesn't agree with theirs. And as that person becomes more and more alone, or more pigeonholed into groups that only say words that are accepting towards their desire, they are raging against all wise judgment. There is no wisdom without contradictions. So let me clarify that a little bit. If everybody is saying yes to everything that you're doing, you are not in a place that has wisdom. You're not in a place where you're going to grow in wisdom. It will not take place there, because you have a bunch of people who are dead set on one opinion, and regardless of the consequences, or regardless of the evidence against it, regardless of the struggles that are happening in people's hearts, they are dogmatically holding to that one opinion, no matter what, to their own destruction and hurt. This is why I think in the church, it's really important that we have the capacity to ask hard questions, because what we don't want to do is just tell people, well, that's what the Bible says, so that's what it is. People need real answers and reasoned thoughts, and sometimes we don't have those answers. Like, why did my brother die in a car accident? Like, that's not an answer that I can say, well, the reason why is because on July 2nd, he said this to this person and that set of chain events. And there's no answer like that for a question like, why did my brother die in a car accident? What we need to do is, yes, bring the biblical answer, which is, all of our days are numbered and we never know when the end of them is going to be. And so that was his time. Like, that sounds really cold and harsh, unless if you have a relationship with that person, and you can walk through those things. And even then, that's not a deep answer. That's like a head answer. So sometimes the answer is like, I don't know. Let's mourn it together. Let's seek the Lord together. Let's cry out to him together. Let's weep together. That is usually the right answer, even if it's, not the easy theological answer. So we need to be open to challenging questions and not just shun them and throw them into a box of well, the Bible says this, so I'm not actually going to reason this out with you and come to a deeper understanding of this problem. Or, so there's groups that are just totally insulated in themselves, and we as the church should not be one of those groups. And then there are the people that, all of their friends say this is a bad idea. All of their family are saying that this is a bad idea, and they just continue to isolate further and further and further until there's nobody left in their life that is telling them no. No is a powerful, helpful word, and it keeps us safe. So in wisdom, there is a desire to seek out opposing viewpoints because it brings us to a complete understanding of the problem that we're facing and all of the challenges that might occur, and allows us to make a rock solid decision instead of just a frivolous and nothing can go wrong decision. Verse 2 says, "A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart." You could pair verse 1 and verse 2 together because really they're describing a similar person. So a fool, a person who is isolating themselves, to pair it with the other verse, is somebody that has no delight in gaining a greater understanding of the situation. They have no humility. They're not teachable in that moment or in that instance. All they want to do is express their own heart. All they want to do is gratify their own desire, right? So that's a thermometer for us as well. Am I somebody that wants to learn? Am I somebody who wants to find out if I'm wrong and change my course in the light of that? Or do I only want to express my own opinion and my own desire and get my way? If you do, then that's a good thermostat that you're not somebody that's walking in the ways of wisdom, and that it's time for you to repent and to change your life so that you can avoid all of the pain and the heartache that comes from walking down the path of folly. Verse 4 says, "The word of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook." So as you can tell, I'm not going to talk about every single verse. I'm just talking about the verses today that stood out to me. And this is one of these verses that I think is a little bit harder to understand. It's more of a riddle. There's this concept of the words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. So what does this mean? What's this contrast? Why is it drawing this imagery, right? And what I think about automatically are deep waters. There's a stillness to them, potentially. There's also a depth. There's kind of a mystery to them as well. Flowing waters are something that bring life, and it's a brook, so it's a generous amount of water. And so that brook brings life. It flows. It has a cleanness to it because it's flowing, and it's something that's on the surface. And so when I think about that in connection with this verse, the words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. What I think about is, okay, so in what somebody says, there can be way more under the surface than what's just plainly revealed. They may make a comment and mean something very different by their comment. They may say that they're fine, but really they're torn up inside. And so if you only look at the surface level of what they're saying, you're missing the man. You are not seeing the whole person. And it takes a wise, discerning question to be able to draw more out of that person so that you can actually either help them or benefit from them or whatever it is. But on the other hand, the wellspring of wisdom is a flowing brook. So there is this sharing aspect of wisdom, right? And not hiding what we mean or hiding our feelings, as long as we are expressing them in a healthy way. Verse 6, 7, and 8 go together, and it's all about your words or your lips. It says, a fool's lips enter into contention, and his mouth calls for blows. A fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. So we have this warning here about, words can lead to destruction, words lead to contention, words lead to the snaring of our souls. And so we really need to be careful about whose words we're listening to, for sure. But also we need to be careful about how we use our words and what and what our words are bringing into the lives of the people around us. And then there's this thing, because I think that all of us are susceptible to gossip, and all of us are susceptible to complaining. And so it says, the words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down into the inmost body. So I think that there's actually this complementary thought happening here, where the words of a fool bring destruction, and the words of a fool, they call for blows, and the words of a fool bring contention. So they bring fighting, they bring quarreling, they bring destruction, they bring all of these bad things. But if they're sugar-coated, you don't always recognize that right away. And those destructive, contentious words end up going down into your soul before you even stop them and filter them out. So here's the lesson is we know there's words that are very obviously destructive and contentious, and it's easy to, stand against those words or walk away from those words or whatever may be appropriate in the situation. But the words that are, oh, we have this secret and, don't tell anyone, but this is what's going on. These sugar-coated, you're in the know, you have special knowledge, I trust you more than I trust other people. These kinds of sugar-coated packages end up delivering folly into our hearts when otherwise we would have our guard up and be protected from it. So the application is just don't be somebody that entertains gossip. If somebody's coming to you and they're gossiping, like I said before, I had a mentor who one of the things that he would do is if somebody started gossiping about somebody else around him, he'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. Let's go talk to them about that and see why they did that thing. And people just didn't gossip around him because when that happens enough times, people are like, well, I don't actually want to resolve any of these conflicts. I just want to gossip about them. Why are you bringing this out into the open? And it exposes people's hearts. And, at the same time, it keeps you safe from being drawn into these destructive things. Verse 9, he who is slothful in his work is a brother to him who is a great destroyer. And why are they brothers? Well, because they both come to the same end. The difference is that a slothful person destroys things slowly, and a destroyer just destroys it right away. So when we entrust ourselves to a slothful person or our businesses to a slothful person, what we're doing is we're entrusting it to somebody that through their actions is going to bring destruction to us and to our businesses and to our relationships or whatever it is. So diligence is one of the key characteristics that we should be looking for in our friends and in our coworkers and in our employees and in our relationships in general, because there's essentially no difference between a destroyer and a lazy person. The only thing that is different about them is the timeline that it takes for them to bring their destruction. And when you think about it like that should be a motivation for you if you struggle with procrastination and you struggle with laziness to stop being a procrastinator and to stop being lazy. Because what you are doing is you are, by indulging yourself and by choosing not to be diligent and work hard, what you are doing is you are choosing to bring destruction to yourself and the people that are around you. And, I don't know somebody that has like a relatively good character who would say that that's like their design and desire in life. And at the same time, somebody who is like bent on foolishness might see that and go, wow, actually, I should change. And so, it could bring repentance in their life. Verse 10 and 11. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The rich man's wealth is a strong city. And let me reread that. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own esteem. So there is this problem that comes from having wealth or a lot of assets, where we depend on them and we think that they are where our security comes from. And that's true. There is a truth to that. But riches can't protect you from everything. If you get terminally ill, like your riches might help with some of that treatment, but they ultimately can't stop you from dying. So the righteous run to the Lord and they are safe in the Lord. Again, this does not mean that nothing bad will happen to you. But what it does mean is that your soul will be safe through anything if you commit it to the Lord. Where if you commit your soul to riches, then you're going to be vulnerable to certain things, even if you think that that you're impervious to everything. Verse 13 says, He who answers a matter big sneeze. He who answers a matter before he hears it is folly and shame to him. So this is one of the principles, one of the reasons why it's important to be slow to speak. Because when we're getting ahead of people's questions, we are burning those relationships. We are showing that we don't care about other people or their problems or what's actually going on in their life. And it shows a fundamental level of arrogance as well. You're like, oh, you haven't even finished talking? Well, I already know the answer to what's going on. In debates, this is kind of one of these principles that can be really hard to execute, because in a debate, you've got two people that are essentially warring against each other, both of whom are trying to make the best argument for their position possible. And so there's a lot of answering before the question is fully answered or asked in debates, because people are trying to get an edge. But in normal life, in day-to-day things, it is extremely important that you wait and hear the whole question. And so, just as a practice, as something that you can apply and do, try to repeat back what you understood somebody to ask before you answer their question. So if they say, I'm really struggling today, I feel depressed, I don't know if I have any friends, I'm just so confused. And then you're like, oh, well, what you need to do is blah, 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 blah. You might be right. You also might have cut them off before they actually finished their whole lament. But sometimes your answer that you're providing might not actually be something that's applicable to them. So it's better to answer back and say, okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're feeling really alone right now in this season. Is that true of every area of your life, or is it more centered around one sphere of your life? And then as you ask those questions and get those questions answered, you're actually able to bring wisdom and a true word. So, avoid the folly. Be a person of wisdom who is a blessing to the people around them. Verse 14 says, "The spirit of a man will sustain him in sickness. But who can bear a broken spirit?" I think attitude is so important in life. And these are the verses that make me have that as a strong conviction, because what we believe in our heart and our attitude towards life and towards the people around us really affects the way that we interact with our world. And when we have a broken spirit and we're in a place of really strong negativity, then that pessimism can pull us down and rob success that we were just about to see from us right before the finish line. I know that I have struggled with self-defeating thoughts a lot. There have been times in my life where I'm really struggling with something. I think back to when I was really struggling with pornography, and I would go for several months and I'd be doing really well. And then I would basically start having these self-defeating thoughts and this fear, and I would essentially be afraid of success and self-sabotage and do something stupid and end up, struggling and being right back into pornography again. And then I'd have to go through the process of repentance and all of these other sorts of things. But a big part of it for me was because I was afraid of the unknown, and I was afraid of what was on the other side of freedom from that addiction. I was afraid of giving up the things that I thought were fun. I was afraid of these sorts of things. And that attitude was just causing so much destruction in my life. So your attitude, your spirit, what you believe and what you think has a dramatic effect on your life. It also has an effect on your health. The people that get sick but have an encouraging family and have an encouraging network of friends and have a positive attitude get well more frequently than the people that are depressed and think they're going to die and have family that doesn't care about them. So when your spirit is broken, it can actually bring you physical harm as well. That's why it's important for us to surrender our spirit to the Lord and to pursue healing in those areas that we have wounding, because we don't want a root of bitterness growing up inside of us. We want to have a clean heart, clean hands, joy unbounding, gratitude, thankfulness, but it does take work. It does take work. Verse 15 says, "The heart of the prudent acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge." So this is one of these principles of wisdom, is that if you're going to be wise and if you're going to be a person of understanding, you are somebody who is a continual learner. Every week, every year, you should be learning and growing as a person. That is one of the marks of a wise and understanding person, and a person that's on the upward path. So never give up on learning, never give up on growing. Don't let yourself settle, because that keeps you from entering into the fullness of wisdom that you were called and destined to enter. Verse 17 says, "The first one to plead his cause seems right until his neighbor comes and examines him." Can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come to me and say, so-and-so is so bad. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's go talk to so-and-so about it. And then when I'm talking to so-and-so, it actually turns out that they have a completely different story than the first person who talked to me. So person A has their own version of the event, and person B has their own version of the event. And usually the truth is in between those two things. And so it's really easy to be like, oh, well, person A came to me, so I believe them. Until person B comes along, and then you talk to them, and as you grow in wisdom, you just learn to form opinions slowly and to get all of the facts before you jump to conclusions. Because this is just one of the parts of human nature, is that it's easy to believe the first person that talks to you about a problem. But if you do that, then you're liable to error and to believe things that are not true. So as an application, always try to get both sides of the story before you form a conclusion. 21 says, "Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit." This is a frequently quoted verse in Christian circles. There are a lot of people that draw whole theologies out of this verse, and they, talk about how the power of death and life is in the tongue. And so, you got to speak words of life, and, you reject all words of death. And yeah, there's some truth there. There's also a lot of stretching that happens on that. So in a literal sense, if you're being convicted of murder and they are, they have the death penalty and the verdict comes out and you're guilty and the judge rules that you're going to be put to death, then yes, the tongue does have the power of death there. And if you get pardoned for something that you've done, yes, the tongue has the power of life there. So there's that level of it. And then there is this metaphysical, factual level as well of what we preach to ourselves does affect our attitude, which does affect our actions. So if we are speaking things that are negative over ourselves all the time or other people, then we're going to reap. Essentially, we're going to fulfill our own prophecies. We're going to vindicate our own words. So if you're like, I'm always a failure and I'm no good and nothing I ever do succeeds, then that's exactly what's going to happen in your life. It's hard for success to come by an accident. So, and if it does, you're going to dismiss it as well, that was only that one time. And, it's going to come bad anyway. So if you're locked into that attitude and into those kinds of words of death, they do have a very real negative power on your life. And at the same time, if you're a person that's encouraging and edifying and you're speaking truth and encouragement and edification over yourself and the people around you, that tends to lead to greater success. When you're like, I can budget, I can be joyful today, I have so many reasons to be thankful, and you name those reasons out loud, it really does dramatically affect your life in a positive way. And I will say this too about this verse, is that I do think that there is a lot of power in actually speaking things out loud, not because it necessarily has a spiritual impact, it definitely can, but because it moves our own heart more. So there is a difference between thinking about something. It's kind of like a very low cost action to take. I just have these thoughts. My thoughts are, I'm gonna be very successful. That's my thought. And it's easy to dismiss that thought. But when I actually put the effort into using my mouth and verbalizing that out loud, I am going to be successful. It activates more parts of my brain. It activates more parts of my heart. It activates more parts of my spirit. And it is actually taking an action in a positive direction to speak that word out loud. So I encourage people to speak truth over themselves out loud, because it does actually change the way that you think and act. So yes, there is power in what we say, and there's a real power there. But also, curses without grounding don't have any effect. They don't alight on you. They don't land on you. Scripture tells us that. So you don't have to be afraid of people's words of death. You don't have to, be like, oh, I've got to voodoo magic all of these words of death away from me. And you can't just sit around and blame words of death for all of your problems. That is not scriptural. It's not wise. It's not the way that we move forward into Christ-likeness. But what we do want to do is we want to speak the truth in love to one another for the edifying of each other in love. So the more that we speak the truth in love to ourselves and to the people around us, the more life that we'll bring into ourselves and our communities. So be generous with your words. Do good with your words. Do good to yourself with your words, and do good to others with your words. Verse 22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." I didn't get married until I was 30, and this was a verse that I struggled with a lot because I really wanted to get married early, and I was like, Lord, why would you hold a good thing back from me? And so sometimes these verses are painful if you're somebody that is still seeking somebody to marry. It can be tough. And so, I understand where you're coming from. It is rough sometimes when you hear these kinds of verses and you're like struggling in your loneliness and singleness. You're like, I just want to get married. Like, why is there a good thing that's being held back from me? And I don't know that I'm going to answer that question, but I'll kind of try to. So firstly, I want to point out that this is a verse that goes both ways. I think that she who finds a husband finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord as well. But, there is a big difference between just finding a spouse and finding a great spouse. And we want to be selective. That's important. It is incredibly beneficial to you to pick a person of wisdom to marry. And not somebody that's perfect, but somebody that is growing in a positive direction and moving forward in their life. So, that's key. You want somebody who loves you. You want somebody who loves others and puts others before themselves. That is a very important thing to look for in a spouse. Ladies, you want somebody who has a well-trimmed beard and is 6'5", with a trust fund and a nice car. That's a joke. None of those things that I just said should be on your list because all of those things are non-negotiables. So really with our list, we want to be very selective, right? We don't want to put a bunch of like superfluous things on there. We should have a core list of like, these are the things that I want in a spouse. And so we should have somebody who is disciplined. You want to find a spouse who is a person of self-control and discipline. You don't want somebody who has no control over their boundaries. If you have you should have physical boundaries in your relationship. And if one or both of you is pushing those boundaries all the time and can't stick to what you agreed to at the beginning of the relationship, then that person or yourself are not ready for marriage. You are not mature enough for it. And you need to grow in maturity first. And so, girls, if you've got a guy that's pushing you to sleep with them, you should break up with them. I don't care about how great they are in every other way. They are not a person of self-control. And that lack of self-control and that lack of self-discipline and that lack of principles and integrity is going to destroy your life in many other ways. And it's going to rob you of your happiness. Absolutely. So, integrity, discipline, these are incredibly important things. Problem solvers, that is a high priority to look for in a spouse. You want somebody that doesn't just collapse under pressure, but is able to think through and evaluate and figure out a course of action and actually carry through on that. So, these are the things that we want to look for. And when you find a great person to marry, then you have so much more potential for good in your life. And there is this just inherent favor that the Lord gives for those who get married, because it's part of his calling, his general calling to humanity, is that we would get married and that we would have kids and that we would rule and have dominion over the earth, that we would steward it well, is what that means, right? And that we would steward every part of our life well. So when we say yes to the Lord and we embark on that journey, there is a favor that we enter into with the Lord. So there's a time and there's a season for that. And if you are somebody that's struggling in your singleness and you want to get married, but you're not finding the right person, then I would say a couple of things. Firstly, it's okay. It's better to wait than to rush into marriage with somebody that is not mature enough for marriage. And it's better to wait and grow in your own maturity before you rush into marriage with somebody else. So here's my advice. Some of my keys, I guess, for success in finding a spouse and actually having a great marriage. One is work on yourself. Be somebody that's continually improving yourself, because you are going to reap the benefits of that when you get married, like tenfold. Every ounce more of maturity that you have it's going to reap really good, satisfying fruit in your relationship. You're going to be on the same page with your spouse. You're already going to know how to resolve conflict in a healthy way. You're going to know how to plan. You're going to know how to follow through on your plans. And these are all things that lead to a really happy, successful marriage. So I would say that. Secondly, I want to point out this. It says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing. There is an action required in finding a spouse. You cannot sit back and do nothing and expect God to bring you a spouse. That does not work. It's not a principle of wisdom. If you want a spouse, you have to find a spouse. And I think that there is way more impetus put on the man in this dance than on the woman, because it's your responsibility as a man to be an image bearer of Christ in the relationship of Christ and the church. And Christ went to seek and save that which is lost. And so what we are supposed to do as men is find a wife. We are supposed to have action and pursue those relationships. And so how we do that is by doing it graciously, and we do it as gentlemen, and we aren't pushy, and we don't fixate on somebody who doesn't want to be with us. That's called being a stalker. So don't do that. What we do is, firstly, you have to be in an environment where there are quality people to marry. Because if you are isolated, you're like, I go home every day after work. I don't hang out with any friends. I, just do all of these like solo activities. Man, your chances of finding somebody are so low because you're not actually around anybody. So have fun, be fun, do fun things, and you'll be with fun people, and you've got a much better chance of finding somebody who would be a quality person to date and see if they're somebody that you want to marry. Secondly is that you do need to actually ask people on a date. I see a lot of people in the Christian community, and I struggled with this as well, who see somebody, they're like, oh, you're really cool. Let's be friends. And that's great. You can be friends, you can build some really, really awesome, great relationships and marriages from being friends first. So that's great. But there is a point where, you should just ask somebody out on a date. If it's obvious, you like them and they like you, and you're interested in them, you should just ask them on a date and say, hey, I'm interested in going on a date with you. Would you go to coffee with me? I would love to chat. And then you can ask them questions that wouldn't be appropriate to ask outside or inside of just a friendship. You can ask them things like, do you want to have kids? How many kids would you want to have? What's your view on marriage? What do you think are healthy boundaries to have in a dating relationship? And explore and see, is this somebody that you actually want to start a relationship with? And then if, they like you and you like them, you've been able to ask those questions, then you say, well, let's go on another date. And let's go on another date. Do you want to be my boyfriend? Do you want to be my girlfriend? And then you pursue that path. So you can't let fear hold you back from actually endeavoring on that journey. I see a lot of people get stuck in this like friend-relationship phase for sometimes a year. And it's like, guys, if you just sat down for coffee, you could ask a bunch of these questions that you're not getting answers to right now and figure out and find out, like, is this somebody that I should even pursue a dating relationship with? And then this is a really big, important thing. Your friends, man, you need your friends when you're dating. You need your friends. You need your family. You need your mentors. I see a lot of people that start dating and then they just isolate from everybody. It's like all of a sudden nobody else exists in the world. That is not how you're going to find a quality spouse. Because once you start dating somebody, the levels of infatuation increase, and those are good. Those aren't necessarily a bad thing. But what it can do is isolate you, where now it's just like you and Susie who are, like, oh, we love each other and blah, 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 blah. And like, you never hang out with your friends. You never get their opinions. And so you basically have all of these potential blind spots where you don't see red flags as red flags because you're like, well, they'll change. They promised. He said that it would be so different if we got married. And really what you needed was your friends and family and mentors to tell you like 4 months ago that this guy is not worth marrying. And you should have listened to them. So it would have saved you a lot of time, and it would have saved you a lot of heartache, because then you get more and more invested into a bad relationship without even realizing it because you aren't listening to your friends and family. So I hope that's helpful. Just some of my advice. And then, when you decide that somebody is the person that you should get married to, don't wait. Ask good questions. Make sure that you ask all of the questions that you need to before you propose to somebody. I'm talking to guys here. And girls, make sure that you ask all of the questions that you need to before you accept a proposal. So ask those questions. There's some great books out there, like 101 Questions to Ask Before You Get Engaged, that can really help you figure out who this other person is before you actually get into a really committed relationship with them. And there are areas that we don't even think about. We don't think about asking when we're in a dating relationship, but are actually really important. Things like, how do you handle your personal finances? What do you think about how kids should be raised and disciplined? And those things can actually have some really strong disagreements that would make it so that it's not wise to marry that other person. So ask good questions, but when you've asked your questions and you are sure that this is somebody that you're supposed to get married to, or when you've asked your questions and you're sure that this is not somebody that you're supposed to get married to, make a decision. Don't just let it draw out forever. Make a decision. If you're 4 months into this relationship and you're like, wow, I don't think this is the person that I'm going to marry, you should tell them that, and you should be honest with yourself. You shouldn't wait for well, maybe he's going to change and maybe this is going to happen, or well, maybe she'll turn around and this, and no, you should just do the honorable thing, do the hard thing, sit them down face to face. Don't do any of these stupid over text message breakups. Be people of integrity. Sit down, look them in the eyes and say, I really care about you. I'm really sorry to have to hurt your feelings, but I don't think that we're a good match for each other. And I don't think that we have a future together in marriage. So I'm ending our relationship. And ladies, hear me out. For guys, it is incredibly important that you are extremely direct and say, the relationship is done. Because a lot of guys will fixate on that relationship and just think oh, maybe if I fix or tweak this one or two things, then she'll accept me. And it can be really, really rough for a guy if he thinks that there's still an open door there, but in your heart, you've closed that door fully. Because man, yeah, it can be really messy and really tough for a guy. So don't do that to each other. Just be very clear, very direct, but very kind in the way that you say it. And I probably didn't even say it the best, but it should be as kind as you can be while being as clear as possible that that relationship is done. And then wait for like 3 months at least before you get into your next actual relationship. You don't want to just jump from relationship to relationship. That's not actually going to help you grow, and it's not going to help you have healthy relationships in general. You do want to take a little bit of time to sit back and evaluate and think and pray through that relationship and talk to your friends about it and, figure out if there's areas that you need to grow yourself. So there was a lady that I dated. She was a great lady. We were just not a good match. We had some disagreements about direction in life and other things like that. And a couple of our core values weren't aligned. And when we broke up, it was hard for sure, but it was also really good. I did not date anybody for a year after that. And part of it is because my friends helped me recognize and see that I was stuck in a cycle of depression where every 3 months or so, I would have like a week where I would just get totally knocked out. And they basically told me, like, you don't want to bring that into a marriage. You want to be somebody that your spouse can rely on. And I was like, yeah, that's actually a really valid point. So let me work on that. And I was on some antidepressants for quite some time. It took a little bit of time to figure out which medication was the right medication for me. I ended up being on the right antidepressant for about 18 months, and then I was able to get off of it, and I haven't needed it since, which is great. But taking that time to work on myself was really key for the success in my next relationship, which was the one that led to marrying my wife. So, it was really good. Wow, I did not plan on talking about any of that. Here we go. Verse 24, this is our last verse. A man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Friends are really important. As it says, if you want friends, you've also got to be friendly. So, again, work on yourself. And if you want friends, then be the person that you would want to be friends with. And loyalty and friendship is indispensable. A real quality friend is a friend that will stick with you through thick and thin, through your successes and your failures. You don't want fair weather friends, and you don't want to be a fair weather friend. You don't want to be friends with somebody as long as they're successful, and then when they are struggling, just like, doop, disappear. You want to be somebody that sticks through the hard times. That's how you build a real, lasting, and strong friendship and relationship. So just as a principle, you got to be friendly if you want friends. So work on being friendly. Take the time to ask people questions instead of always stating your own opinion. I think that's one of the keys of friendship, and one of the keys of friendliness is that you are interested, genuinely interested in the other person. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.